topic is emotions, or the role that emotions play in our functioning as human beings created in God's image. And to introduce the topic, I wanted to start with a story of an elderly couple who was sat down one evening at their meal, and about halfway through, the husband looks up to his wife and he says to her, he says, "Honey, I've been thinking today, you know what? I think I have a bit of an anger problem. And I'm really sorry for the times when my anger flares up and I just get cross with you seemingly for no reason. But I do want to say that you seem to cope with it really well." The wife looks up from her dinner and she says to her husband, "Well, I've got a coping strategy for that. Whenever you get angry, I quietly go off to the bathroom and I clean the toilet." The husband says to her, "Really? Just doing that works?" She says, "Yes, because I use your toothbrush." Now, the point is that emotions, they can be things which can make us do some actions or take some decisions, make some choices which are controversial, or they could hurt somebody else, or they could affect a relationship. But they can also be wonderful things because they are God-given, and anything that is God-given is to be used in a way that can bring pleasure and enjoyment to someone. And so when God gave humanity emotions, he was really reflecting himself, because God is a God who knows joy. He is a God that knows peace. He is a God that doesn't know any anxiety or anything like that. We'll get onto the negative emotions in a moment. But God is a God who has, the best way we could describe it, as emotions displayed from within him. Now, we can't reduce God's emotional state to the level of human emotional state. It transcends our ability to understand. But in some way beyond that we can fully imagine, God does have emotions and we have emotions. The trouble is that since the fall, our emotions have got really out of whack. Before the fall, there would have been no fear, there would have been no guilt, there would have been no shame. Those things would have not been there. I surmise there probably wouldn't have been any anger either, although we'll get onto the fact that anger isn't always necessarily bad. But the fact that Adam and Eve had emotions was because God gave them. And after the fall, what happened was as sin came into human thinking, then the emotions were affected as a consequence. And what I want to begin to do this evening for you is to illustrate to you from a few passages of scripture and some understanding that I've gleaned across the years as a pastoral counselor, to illustrate to you the role of emotions and help you to understand the function of emotions in a way that helps you to kind of get your head around, when you feel a negative emotion or a positive emotion, what it is those emotions are trying to achieve for you. At the top of the notes, I've got this kind of strap line under where it says session 4, why don't you snap out of it? It says, "Are feelings the captain or the lookout on your ship?" And by that, I mean that some people use emotions to drive their decisions, like the captain of a ship making the decision of the trajectory of the boat. Some people have their emotions operating like that. It kind of, if I feel this, then I must do that. If I feel the other, then we must go in this direction. But that is not the role of emotions. That's not what they were given for. They were given to help guide us to understand situations. They weren't there as the primary means of making a decision in circumstances. They're not there to govern our decision making. They're there to inform our decision making. But sadly, many people simply base their decisions on how they feel. And because emotions can fluctuate, they can go up and down. One minute we're feeling sad, another minute we're feeling happy. If we purely base our emotions on how we are feeling, we will rob ourselves of a life of consistency, and we will rob others of the best version of us, because they will only get the version of us depending on how we're feeling at any one time. And that will bring instability into relationships, and that is not a good platform to build relationships. And yet we can't simply push emotions aside and live in some way that we would say, using an antiquated English term, a stoic way, which is a kind of a way to live above emotion, in a way that we live slightly detached from emotion. We need to include emotions in our decisions. We need to include emotions in our day-to-day functioning, but we shouldn't let them set the temperature of our relationships, and we shouldn't let them set the trajectory of our daily lives and our decision making. Now, at the bottom of page 1, I just want to help us begin this journey as to what emotions are and how they function by putting them into 3 categories. The first category I've given is the category of sensations. Now, sensations are not emotions as we would typically understand them, like anxiety or fear or guilt or shame, but we use the word feelings to describe, like, I feel my heart racing, or I feel something tingly. So we use that word feeling, but what we're describing there is not an emotion as such, although we use the word feeling for both emotions and sensations. It's to describe something that we're experiencing, some biological response to some stimulation that's happening from outside of us. Another category is one of impulse. Now, I'm on a bit of a healthy eating kick at the moment, and I've managed, I think I haven't weighed myself in the last few days, but close to 3/4 of a stone. And I get what's called an impulse every now and then to eat something I deep down know I shouldn't eat, like chocolate. Chocolate's been a hard one to give up. So far, so good. I haven't touched chocolate in about 8 weeks, but occasionally I feel an impulse, like I need to go and have some chocolate. I feel I need some chocolate. Again, we use that word feeling there, but it's not such an emotion as anger or fear or such, although I can feel quite angry if I go without food I like for a period of time, but that's another thing. So feelings, so we can have sensations and we can have impulses, and the Bible says, and I've given us a reference there, that we shouldn't allow impulses to dictate how we act, how we respond, the way that we talk to people. We shouldn't talk to people based on how we feel. We should talk to them as Christ would talk to somebody. That's how we should talk to people, not purely on how they're making us feel at any one time. Right. But the third category is what I would say is the standard category of emotions, which are things like anger, joy, fear, guilt, or shame. Those are emotions that we would typically say come under the general category of emotions. But the first thing we need to understand is those emotions don't simply just pop in us out of nowhere. Even if we don't know where an emotion has come from, and there are some times when we're going through our daily life routine, meeting someone, we'll suddenly start to feel a certain way, and we don't know where that feeling or that emotion has come from. Now, just because we don't know where that feeling has come from doesn't mean that it isn't linked to something objective, that if we were to think a little bit deeper, we would be able to find a connection between something that's happening to us, or maybe a memory that's come up in our mind from something that the situation is reminding us of. Our emotions never just pop up out of nowhere. They're linked to something. And so if we want to work with our emotions effectively, we have to recognize that they are linked to things beyond themselves. And to start us along this train of thought and develop it a bit further, I want us to look at Genesis 32. I'm going to read from verse 1 up until verse 11. And the context of this passage is that Jacob, if you read to chapter 31, verse 3, God calls Jacob to leave Laban's estate where he had been. Laban is his father-in-law, and to go back to his homeland, to his family. And he's just about to get close to where his family live. And he recognizes that he's about to face his brother, who he diddled out of the father's blessing. That normally the protocol was within a Jewish household that the eldest brother would receive the blessing of the father. They would be, as the father would pass on, he's kind of commissioning that next generation. That would, by tradition, go to the eldest son. Now, Jacob had deceived his father, and instead of Esau, his brother, getting the blessing, he had received the blessing. And then he had left and ended up eventually, after a bit of journeying and wandering, he ended up this guy Laban's household as a hired hand and ended up marrying two of his daughters. Now he's on his way back. So you can imagine in that day and age, he's not going to be looking forward to seeing his brother, because he's just diddled him out of his birthright as the elder sibling to the father's blessing. And it says this from verse 1 up to verse 11. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When Jacob saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named that place Manaheim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He instructed them, This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. You see his language there. He's almost groveling, calling him his lord. Your servant Jacob, again, he's just using language as a way to try and just to soften the blow of going to meet his brother. He says, your servant Jacob, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I'm sending this message to my lord that I might find favor in your eyes. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Now imagine if you're Jacob at this point. You're already seriously nervous about meeting with your brother because you left on bad terms. You've deceived him out of the birthright of the father's blessing that he should have received. And now you've sent messages ahead. You tried to use language in a way to kind of butter them up, calling him Lord and you the servant. And then these messages come back and say, well, actually, he's coming to see you. Now he's going to meet you before you get back. And he's got 400 men with him. You're thinking in your brain, goodness me, I'm absolutely in for it here. I'm going to die. The narrative goes on. In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and the herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. So he's got a contingency plan. He's got a plan A and a plan B. Like, I'm going to go up, but if I send two groups and one of them gets attacked, well, then I've got this contingency. This other group may be able to escape while one group is being attacked. And he's doing this, the narrative says, out of fear. Then Jacob prayed, "Oh God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, Lord, you who said to me, go back." Now he's saying, Lord, this was your idea. I'm only obeying you here. If anything bad happens, this is kind of on you. He says, Lord, go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown to your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two camps. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid. He will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children too. So what we need to notice here is that Jacob's emotions are coming out of situations. Even before he sees a look in his brother's eye, he is already emotionally anticipating the encounter that he's about to have. So the emotions are linked to situations that haven't already happened, or maybe in part linked to something that happened previously. But the emotions that he faced were based on what he felt was coming in front of him in a few days' time, I guess, by the time that Esau had traveled to him, and also based on his memory of a past situation. So the emotions that were processing him and steering his decision-making, shaping his strategy of how to handle the situation, were based on perceptions, were based on memories. So emotions, they come out of situations. They are linked to things like memories. They are linked to things that we may be anticipating, or things maybe we want, or maybe we lack, or maybe we feel that we need. But our emotions aren't just popping up randomly in our head, detached from any reality whatsoever. So in order, therefore, to begin to process emotion effectively, we have to begin to link the emotions that we're feeling with a likely situation that they are going to be connected to. And sometimes when we're going through a difficult circumstance and a lot of different emotions are buzzing around inside our mind and in our heart, we're feeling up a minute and down a minute and hopeful 1 minute, and then we're feeling down the next. In order to begin to make sense of all of that stuff, we have to begin to piece together circumstances, situations that we do know, and link them to the likely emotion, which may be kind of obscure to us at that time in terms of we're not quite sure which emotion to feel. We need to be able to link emotions to situations. And as we do that, we'll get a bit of peace of mind. And the reason is, rather than just cycling through a lot of emotions, once you anchor them in a real situation, the reality of a situation, that you can then fix on just one emotion. Because then the two things marry up and pair up and they make sense. Even if it's a negative emotion that you have to land on, you need to know what you're dealing with. And so to stop the cycle of emotions and the fear and the anxieties, you have to link them to situations. So the first point is that when you want to process your emotions effectively, then begin to link them to situations. If the situation doesn't seem to match any of the emotions that you're feeling, maybe think how the situation that you're currently in may be similar to a situation that you've been in previously, where subconsciously you might feel there is a link to something that happened to you in the past that is now making it's kind of showing itself in your present. So we need to link emotions to situations. Now, the second thing that we need to do is to know that we feel emotions in proportion to our needs or our desires or what we think is going on. Now, going back to this illustration of me feeling hungry again. Now, during this time of trying to be a bit healthier eating, I am still eating. I'm not starving myself. I'm not on some sort of crazy fast. I am eating. But just imagine for a minute that if through the entire period of this coronavirus lockdown period, I hadn't eaten a thing. If I hadn't eaten a thing, by now I would be absolutely starving. So my hunger would be in proportion to my need. My hunger would be in proportion to my need. And the same thing is true of emotions. Our emotions are in proportion to our perceived need. If, for example, you haven't been in a relationship for a long period of time and you're feeling on the inside you ache to be in a relationship, the emotions you feel when those you maybe get a season in a relationship when it's not working out too well, well, then in the proportion to how well you either feel connected in that relationship or how much unfulfilled need has not been met in that particular relationship, or if you're out of a relationship, how long it's been since you've had a relationship, the amount of anxiety or fear that are attached to those relationships will be in proportion to your sense of need. If things aren't being fulfilled in a particular relationship, then you will feel a great deal of anxiety or fear about that relationship because there is a great deal of need that has been unsatisfied within you. If you haven't been in a relationship for a long period of time, then you might get nervous or anxious when you start to begin a relationship because you feel there is so much riding on that relationship because your need for a relationship has been there for so long, you feel really hungry for a relationship. And so the emotions that we feel are going to be in proportion to our need. So if you're feeling intense emotions, then there must be an intense level of perceived need inside your heart, inside your life. Now, it might not be a real need, it might only be a perceived need, but somewhere in you, you feel there is a lot riding on a situation. Therefore, if you're feeling intense emotions, you need to start to think, why is it I think I need this so badly? Why is it I feel I need this with such an intensity? There is so much emotion generating on the inside of me when I think about this relationship. Or maybe it's not a relationship, maybe it's a job. You've been without a job for a long period of time, and every time you get into a job interview, you're paralyzed with anxiety and fear. And you're thinking to yourself, why am I feeling anxious and fearful simply being in a job interview? It's because in your mind and your heart, you know how much you need that job. Your level of anxiety and fear will be in proportion to your sense of need. And not only are our emotions intense to our perception of how much we need something, the type of emotion that we will feel is also relative to what we think we need as well. Now, going back to this illustration of me being hungry, imagine I'm in a situation where I've not eaten for maybe a morning, just a morning. Most people can skip food for half a day unless you've got a particular health problem. And then I decide to go to the cupboard, and I think, oh, there's a snack there that I can have. And then I look inside the cupboard, and the snack's not there. I expected the snack to be there, it's not. And I look around, and one of my kids has got that snack in their hand. And I go to take the snack, and they say, no, I'm not letting you have the snack. Now, what I would start to feel there, because my son is blocking my goal of getting that snack, I would start to feel angry. I would start to feel angry because they're denying me my needs. So anger is a way that our body processes the frustration that comes from having our needs blocked. If we can't attain something, we can't get something, we see somebody else is blocking that goal, then we will feel angry. Now, if we feel that the person might give us something, but we're not sure, and we're uncertain about that goal, then we will not feel angry, we will feel anxious. If we feel that we could potentially reach that goal, but we're not sure definitely we will because there is something lacking in us, we might move from a place of anxiety to a place of guilt, where we start to see ourselves as responsible for not being enough to obtain that goal, to reach that desired need and satisfy it. So depending on how we perceive us and others in relation to our needs depends not only on the intensity of the emotions that we feel, but also the type of emotions that we feel. If someone is blocking a goal, we will feel angry. If somebody is maybe possibly going to deny us our goal, we will feel anxious. If we feel we're not enough to attain our goal, we might feel guilt or possibly some shame. So the type of emotion that we feel is linked to the goal. So if you're in a situation, you're trying to make sense of your emotions, you need to first link your emotions and anchor them in a real situation to stop them cycling through your mind. The second thing is you need to think of, why are they as intense to me right now? Why is it that I think I need what I need so badly that I'm feeling like I do with the intensity of emotion that I do? And the third thing is to understand the actual emotion you're feeling will give you some idea of how it is you're perceiving exactly what you need. And the reason that this is important is because if you want to live your best possible life for the Lord, you need to be able to effectively and maturely manage your emotions. Now, I'm not saying people who struggle to manage their emotions cannot achieve things for the Lord. But what I am saying is that if you want to achieve your best possible life for the Lord, we have to work with God and ask Him to help us to be able to manage our emotions as effectively as possible. And the pathway to effectively managing our emotions, to having something we see in counseling jargon called emotional intelligence, to be intelligent in the way that we manage our emotions, we need to be able to know exactly what we're dealing with and why we're feeling it, and why we're feeling exactly what we're feeling in order to deal with it. Because while we're in a situation in life where you're facing job interviews, you're working through relationship issues, or you're trying to raise a family and finding things hard, what typically happens is that in your mind and your heart, you will feel a whole range of emotions. You may feel fear, angry, doubt, confusion, guilt, shame, all these things cycling through. And in order to stop that and process what you need to process so that you can lead your emotions and your emotions are not leading you, you need to understand how they function. They're rooted in situations. So make sure that the situation and the emotion, they correspond, so that it's clear that they link together. So then you can narrow down what emotion you're feeling. Then you begin to see why you feel it so intensely. What does this say about me that I have so much stock in wanting to have this particular outcome? What is going on in me that I feel that level of intense emotion? Why do I feel this particular emotion? Why do I feel angry at that person? Why do I feel guilty myself? Why do I feel shame? Why is it that I feel fear right now? And in order for you to live in emotional intelligence, then you need to be able to figure these things through in some sort of coherent process. We need to be able to engage in our emotions and not let the emotions captain our decisions. How many relationships struggle because people are arguing over things that they think are issues, and they're not the real issues, because they've assumed that the emotion that they're feeling is the correct interpreter of what's going on right now. There are people who often get into marital and family strife based on arguments that are out of how they're feeling, assuming that their perceptions of what they're feeling is true, like it's accurate. Because the other thing I would say is that feelings are not facts. Feelings are not facts. Just because we feel something doesn't mean it's the reality of the thing that we're facing. It might not be true. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 4. Story of Cain and Abel. From verse 2, it talks about giving birth to Abel after Cain. So Cain is the older one of the two brothers. It says, now Abel kept flocks and Cain worked the soil. In the course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. And Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. The Lord looked with favor on Abel and his offering, but on Cain and his offering he did not look with favor. So Cain was very angry and his face was downcast. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? That's a great question to ask yourself. Why are you angry? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, then sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Before I go on, think about this. God is saying to Cain, the way you handle your emotions will determine the level of access the devil has to your life in some degree. If you don't learn to manage your emotions and do the right thing, the devil will take advantage of your emotional state of vulnerability and leverage that to bring destruction into your life. So there is a great deal riding on how well we manage our emotions. God is warning Cain that if he didn't manage his emotions in a godly way, he would leave a door open in his life for the enemy to come in and to wreak havoc. And so if Cain had gone through the process of, why am I feeling angry? What is it I'm angry about? I believe if he'd done a bit of soul searching, he would have seen there was some jealousy in him towards his brother, because although the issue wasn't with his brother, the issue was with Cain. The fact is that if you read rabbinic sources around and literature about this passage, the rabbinic understanding is that Cain knew really what God wanted was not portions of crop. He wanted some animal sacrifice. Although Cain offered what was his within the domain of his influence, he was a guy that worked. He was an arable farmer. He worked the ground. He just brought something that was convenient for him to offer to God. That it's assumed here. It's not said in the text as such, but it's assumed that Cain knew that really what God wanted from him was some animal stuff, which was associated with his brother. His brother was the one who had the livestock. So it seems to be that Cain is jealous at his brother, but his brother is not the problem. His attitude is the problem. The fact that he's not asking why he feels angry is the problem. The fact is he's not dealing with his emotional state. That is the problem. Abel wasn't the problem. It was Cain's jealousy. It was Cain's laziness. It was Cain's lack of emotional intelligence. It was the fact that deep down he wanted the approval of God, but he wasn't prepared to go about it in the correct manner and wanted it on his own terms. All of these were factors to why Cain felt as he felt. And because he felt that way, he then acted on that. It became not the outlook on his ship. It became the captain of his ship, the decision-making engine of his life. And he decided, well, I'm angry, and so I believe that Abel is the problem, and he's going to get it. I'm going to take out the opposition. Maybe rather than just bringing God the right offering, if I take my competition out the way and there's no Abel in the equation, then I won't be compared to him, and God might accept what I have to offer him. His whole strategy is obscured because he's ignorant of why he feels what he feels. He doesn't understand himself, and therefore he runs on the wrong assumptions and he makes bad decisions. Because you shouldn't make decisions based on how you feel, because they come with perceptions, and those perceptions can be wrong. And so going back to what I was talking about with families and with relationships, the reason I'm stressing these tonight about families and relationships, as I think I did a bit last week, is because we live in a day and age where there is a constant battleground over sustaining Christian marriage and family. We have never in the history of the church statistically seen so many marriages and families break apart as we do in this generation. It has never happened. Now, some people may argue that really that marriages were having struggles and difficulties many generations ago, but because the kind of social norms didn't allow for divorce, etc., then they were just kind of swept onto the carpet and not addressed. But we are living in a time and age when there is a real vicious battle going on for families and for marriage. And one thing I would say, after having counseled marriages for nearly 20 years, is that we need to make sure, if we're dealing with confrontational problems within the marriage, that we don't run under the assumption that just because we feel a certain thing in a relationship, that accurately reflects the reality of what's going on in the relationship. Because, shock and horror, sometimes we can be wrong. There are times, even as a counselor, I will feel something in my marriage where I might get uptight or irritated or frustrated by something. And then I've maybe just acted towards my wife in a certain way based on how I feel, because it seems to be linked to a reality as it appears in my mind. And I've got frustrated with Nikki purely based on a wrong assessment of the evidence, a wrong assessment of myself. Often the problem is in me and not in somebody else. And if we deal with relationships purely based on assuming that how we feel is an accurate marker of reality, we will rob ourselves and we will rob others of a healthy relationship. It is really, really serious. And in the same way that Cain and Abel faced problems because Cain didn't ask himself the question of, deep down, why is it really I feel how I feel? Is it Abel's fault or is it my fault? It was easier to blame Abel than it was for him to take the responsibility on himself. If he'd looked at himself rather than looking at somebody else, he could have dealt with this quickly. He could have come back to God and said, God, you know what, inside I want to kill my brother, but deep down I see there's an attitude problem within me. And if I operate on the basis of my emotions right now, somebody's going to die. So Cain needed to operate with a level of emotional intelligence that didn't assume that how he felt was the correct indicator of his reality. And I've put an appendix within your notes that were sent out today. And it's interesting reading, I would suggest to you. I think it's up on the screen now. I haven't got time to go into it, but I would encourage you to read that. This is not something I've pulled from a book, although you will see the same ideas in other books. So it's not just an idea that I brought, which is unaccountable to ideas outside of myself. This is a fairly common cycle of how thoughts and feelings operate within a situation and cause us spiraling down to a low point in a relationship or the collapse of a relationship, not based on the reality of a problem, but a perceived reality of the problem, which causes a conclusion which could have been avoided had we actually, or the person had actually dealt with the real issue rather than how they felt the issue really was. So we need to guard our hearts, look at our hearts, examine our hearts to figure out really what is going on. So as part of that, I would say as well, in point 4 of the points here, feelings are not assumed to be acted on. I've got a verse here, Ephesians 4:26-27 in the Message translation. It says, "Go ahead and be angry. You do well to be angry, but don't use your anger as fuel for revenge, and don't stay angry. Don't go to bed angry. Don't give the devil that kind of foothold in your life." You see, the language that Paul uses here in Ephesians is similar to the language that God uses in Genesis chapter 4. How the enemy can use anger as an open door to cause havoc in relationships. So in the same way that anger caused havoc in the relationship between two brothers, Cain and Abel, Paul is warning that if you don't deal with your anger properly in your relationships, then it can also cause havoc there. And it's the same devil who's using to leverage those opportunities to get in and gain a foothold. Okay, 2 more things before we close. Another thing I'm often asked in dealing with relationships is, what do I do if I don't feel something that I do want to feel for somebody, and that positive feeling has gone? So far, what I've basically said is that our emotions are linked to situations. Our emotions are in proportion to our need or our perceived need. That our emotions reflect how we understand our role in a situation. If we feel we're responsible, we'll feel guilty. If we feel somebody else is responsible, we'll feel angry. And those are how often negative emotions work. But what happens in a situation where there is a relationship where there was once positive feeling and now there isn't necessarily negative feeling, but there isn't any feeling at all? There's been like a hardness of heart, or there's been a slow erosion of feeling over time to the point of numbness, or maybe going beyond numbness to a place of bitterness and deep hurt. People often say to me, is it possible to recover relationships after emotions have gone to a negative place? My short answer is yes, but my pastoral response is it takes patience and it takes time, but it is absolutely possible. There are lots of verses in the Bible that we could talk about to justify my position on this. But basically, that what I would offer to you is this, that our emotions, when they were once positive, they were related to a way of relating to that person. So, for example, if you're building a bond and there's trust and there's all of the kind of the fun and the enjoyment and all of that stuff is there, that's how the excitement grows, the joy grows, the peace grows, etc., etc. Now, sometimes after neglect or negligence in a relationship, things can quietly and subtly begin to erode on the inside, and then they erode on the outside. We start to lose the battle within, and then it reflects on the relationship outside of us. And that begins a slippery slope down to where things become hard and maybe even bitter and numb towards somebody. Now, we may agree in our minds that when we did the right kinds of things in the past, then we were in a good space, or that couple was in a good space. But it's a struggle to do the same things again and get the same results. And that's because of our memories. Our memories are a powerful thing which often block us recovering what was lost because of the negative memories which are associated to something and the deeper perceptions of negativity that we've painted on someone. But what I would say to you is this: outside of the context of a counseling situation, I couldn't fully explore this in the uniqueness of any one particular relationship. But there is a period of time when we begin to do the right things, but we don't feel a corresponding emotion where we are inclined to give up before the emotion has caught up with our decision. I'm going to say that again. There is a period of time when we begin to live in a way that we want to recover something and restore something, where for a season it feels like we're going through the motions. It's very forced, it's quite contrived and difficult, and we don't seem to yield the emotional fruit of our determined new decisions. And what we have to do at that point is we have to persevere long enough for our emotions to fully catch up with our decisions. There is always a delay, a lag between how we feel and what we decide to do. And this is a principle not just for relationships, but also for things in discipleship. We can, for example, talk about verses of scripture that have to do with peace and have to do with joy. And we're reciting verses of scripture to ourselves and begin to live in such a way that should reflect that we have peace and joy, but we don't, deep down, don't feel peace and joy. Well, we don't nullify the word of God based on how we feel. We have to keep operating in certain ways until our emotions catch up with our decisions. And it's in the period of time between when we start to act and the time when our emotions begin to thaw and catch up with our decisions. That is when we want to give up. But that is the time when we need to resolve within ourselves that if I stay on this path, that if I trust the Lord, all things are possible. So I don't want to paint that as a generalization for every relationship, but what I would offer to you is this, that never write off a relationship based on your struggle to feel what you once felt, because it is possible to feel those things again. You felt them once before, you can feel them again, but it is requiring patience and perseverance in order to recover those things. So finally, I've got some interventions here on the final page. Just bring this into land for the 1 minute we've got left.
Yeah, Dave, I would take a couple of minutes on this because I think really the interventions that you list here can be really practical to people. So please don't rush these last sentences because this is important.
Okay, so I've mentioned there what I say at the beginning of the interventions. There's a period of time while our new script for how we want to feel feels incongruous or out of keeping with how we deep down feel inside of ourselves. So basically we say, this is the way we want to go, this is the direction we want to go, and I'm going to go in that direction in faith, but I don't feel as though how I want to feel based on what I want to achieve out of this relationship or whatever you're doing. So you're going down a path, you decide to go that way, but you know there's a while where you're walking out that decision, you don't feel as good as you would want to feel. So you have to persevere. The first thing is that you need to persevere. The second thing is you need to label your emotions. I said that at the beginning. Label your emotions and label them tentatively. Just because you say, okay, it's anger, definitely anger. I definitely feel that. I don't need to go to a psychologist to know that I feel angry right now. Yeah. Just because that is the most dominant emotion that you feel, that might not be the emotion that's left after you examine the situation more carefully. Cain felt angry, but what he was deep down feeling was jealousy, insufficiency, frustration. So he would quickly, well, I'm angry. Yeah, but if you dig down underneath that anger, what is it that you're really feeling, Cain? Well, he would, I think, with some help and support, if I was to be Cain's therapist in some bizarre, other paradoxical universe, then I would be saying to him, why do you feel angry? You feel angry because you feel frustrated, because you feel jealous, because you feel insecure, because you desire a relationship with God based on your own terms and not on the terms that God has given you. So there's a frustration that you're masking within yourself that is now projecting on as a reason onto your brother. So although he labeled anger was not his problem. It was the problem for his brother because it caused his murder. But deep down under that, there were other emotions. So you need to label your emotions. And there is a theory within counseling and psychotherapy called affect labeling, which is basically saying that when we label an affection or something that we're feeling, actually that does bring as well some peace. And I talked about at the beginning how emotions can cycle around while we're trying to figure out exactly why we feel what we feel. And the part of the brain which is dealing with, I don't want to bore you with the science here, is the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that's dealing with your fear and dealing with anxiety and all those things. It's circling to, what do I feel? What do I feel? What do I feel? And when you label something, your brain then decides what you're dealing with, and peace and calm comes as a consequence of actually giving something a label. So if you want to calm yourself down, give it a label, because affect labeling actually stops the brain's part that's figuring out what to feel and then moves to another part of the brain to think about what you actually need to do now. And so it calms you down because you're actually moving the process of the brain from where it's trying to figure out what to feel to the part where it actually says, well, what do I need to do in light of that feeling? So label your emotions, but label them tentatively. Decide not to let your feelings dictate your actions. How many times have we justified speaking our mind to somebody because we just feel that they, what they've done justifies us sharing a piece of our mind? Or we might say, I'm the type of person that doesn't suffer fools gladly, or they're bang out of order for what they're saying. I know I shouldn't lose my temper like this, but what, they've overstepped a line. And what we've done is we've justified to ourselves our response and actions to them, not based on how Christ would want us to respond, but on the level of emotion that we're feeling within us. So we can't operate as mature disciples of Jesus Christ. We can't respond to people based on how we're feeling. I always refer to this in difficult counseling situations. How do we think Jesus felt when he was on the cross? Yet the words that came off his lips were, Father, forgive them. So there are times when we're in excruciating and agonizing pain, and we may in ourselves want to say and do one thing, but the response that we should in a way that honors God causes us to live in a way where our emotions do not dictate our decisions. We live by grace and not by law. So we can't live on the lies of, they will only learn if they get a taste of their own medicine. It's only fair that they get some of their own justice. I don't suffer fools gladly. I'm the type of person who needs to, or I can't stand injustice. There are a lot of angry people who are expert at spotting injustice, because injustice seems a good excuse for anger. So there are a lot of people who spot the injustice in a situation. They spot the mistakes that people made, and they say, I'm not getting angry for the sake of anger. I'm getting angry because they've crossed a line, or they've made this mistake, or there's an issue of justice here. And it's surprising how many people who have an anger issue actually mask it with a perceived sense of justice, and that's not the thing. And then you need to map it out in accordance with what I talked about earlier, about why am I thinking and feeling and acting in certain ways. What is it I want? Is it love? Is it a sense of purpose that I'm missing out on now? Is it a sense of not being valued? Is this person robbing me of my sense of value? Is this person blocking my goal of love? Begin to piece together your thoughts and your feelings and root them in situations. And finally, I would say, bring other people. If you have emotions which are causing you problems, then do not keep those emotions to the audience of your own mind. Share them, because the echo chamber of your mind will just be reflecting against its own thoughts and ideas. You need to bring other people in to help you understand yourself. One of the biggest lies that people fall for is that they accurately know their own mind. And there are times that we do, absolutely. We do know our own mind, but particularly when emotion is at its hottest or it is most difficult, it will, by nature, obscure your perception to the point you will less likely understand yourself the more intense an emotion is. So the more intense your anger, the more intense your anxiety, the more intense your guilt or your shame or your fear, the less likely it is that you see clearly, because those emotions themselves will obscure your ability to be objective. So you have to bring other people into the situation and ask somebody to walk with you through the situation. The final thing is, make sure you pray. Pray first, speak second. The amount of struggles and strifes that we would save ourselves from if we prayed first and talked after prayer. A lot of people speak first and pray for forgiveness rather than praying for grace and then speaking that grace out. We need to speak after we pray and after we understand, and not before. And if we do that, we will live better lives. There are a ton of other things I would love to say on this topic, I just don't have time for it. It's a massive subject, and there's not a lot of Christian material out there really on managing your emotions. Maybe that'll be something to write in the years ahead. But it's such a necessary thing. I go back to that thing I said to Cain and what it says in Ephesians, that the enemy looks to leverage your emotion to his advantage. That's why emotional intelligence is a spiritual thing, because it will guard you and guard your relationships against the enemy getting a foothold in you and in a relationship that you have.
Yeah, so we need to submit our emotions to Jesus every day as we seek to follow him intentionally, consciously, prayerfully. A couple of questions that have come in, some good questions. This one here says this, Dave. It says, some people are more aware of themselves than others. Is it helpful to label the feelings in your spouse if they really cannot explain what they are feeling themselves?
That depends.
So maybe not necessarily a spouse, but maybe a close friend as well.
It depends on the strength of your relationship with them.
Yeah.
And it depends on whether you perceive any resistance in them as well. Now, if the person is unlikely to receive it well, then all you're going to do is getting them to be defensive and push back against what you say is well-intentioned advice. Sometimes it might seem the obvious thing just to confront somebody with, this is what you're feeling. I know you don't understand yourself very well right now, but trust me, I know what I'm talking about. You feel guilty or angry. If that's not said in the right way to the person at the right time, you can do more harm than good with that approach. There's a great book by a guy called David Augsburger called Caring Enough to Confront. It's a brilliant book on dealing with confrontational things that could be confrontational, even if you're not actually intending to be confrontational, things which obviously you're putting a responsibility on someone, saying, look, this is your emotional state. This is how you feel and why you feel it. And just trust me. Now, even as a counselor, where the expectation of the person that's sat in front of me is expecting me to help them label their emotions, I'm still having to read them very carefully to know how to present it to them and when to present it to them in order to not get them to suddenly pull back and push back against something, because you're putting responsibility on their lap. And if they're as emotionally unintelligent as you suggest that they might be, well then there are a whole other set of difficulties that come with that. That means they're more prone to probably be defensive because they haven't got the emotional intelligence to process stuff, and therefore more likely to kick back against it. And also that it can create a whole lot of secondary problems if it's not handled with a delicate touch. So the timing, the tone of voice, the temperature of the relationship, the trust that you have, all of these things need to be carefully established in order for you to and the best thing as well you need to do is recognize that rather than labeling things for them, you need to lead people on a journey where they can see that labeling for themselves. That is a far better way of doing it. It's a long journey, not a short journey. And a lot of people who want to label other people's emotions, they don't want to go on the long journey. They want to go on the short journey. They were like, this is your problem, deal with it. And that is a problem in itself. But if you get somebody to go on a journey to understand it, they will own it. They're basically being asked to own it based on your assessment. Just because you're more emotionally intelligent doesn't mean they're more inclined to emotionally own that thing. So going on a journey to the point where you're helping someone to understand themselves, they will own it, and then they will begin to do it more naturally because it's clicked with them. They're not just taking your word for it.
Yeah, and I think with all of these things, I think that probably the greatest thing the greatest gift that we could ever be to someone or receive from someone is to be a friend who can have an honest conversation, like to speak gently, compassionately into someone else's life. And yes, just one more question because the time has gone. Someone asked the question: is love a feeling or a choice?
Both.
There you go.
In the practical sense, although if you read the biblical passages about love, although if you go into the Song of Solomon, then you're going to get a different flavor on what love should be to your emotional disposition towards a person. But a lot of the love stuff is love as a verb. It's a doing word. husbands, love your wives. God isn't commanding us to the scriptures to feel a certain thing towards your life. When he says love your wife, he's commanding us to act in a certain way, which is loving. So love expressed as a verb, as a doing word, is the way that you'll read about it in the New Testament. When you read through 1 Corinthians 13, I'm just going to quickly read this to finish from, I think it's the Message translation. It's one of the looser, more relaxed translations. It says, love is large and incredibly patient. Love is gentle and consistently kind to all. It refuses to be jealous when blessing comes to somebody else. There's a setup of compare and contrast between the way you would likely want to feel in a certain situation and the demands of love for you to act in a certain situation. So it refuses to be jealous when blessing comes to someone else. It kind of assumes that you're going to want to be jealous, but love would say, don't operate on how you feel, operate on what love is in terms of the way that you act towards them. So I think I could go on and you could read through that 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8 passage and see that primarily Christian love has to do with actions and not with emotions. But if you live those actions out long enough, then the emotions will follow. This is the whole thing about the restoration of relationship. You have to be patient enough with the process for the emotions to catch up with the decisions. While we're living in decision, emotion will take a time to correspond to those decisions, but it will correspond. But it takes patience. And it takes two people to commit to an us more than a me. There's a lot of people who have breakdowns of relationships. They don't get me. They don't get me. They don't understand me. They don't know what I'm about. They don't understand what I need. Me, I, me. And I'm not taking away the importance of that in a relationship. But a committed Christian relationship is more committed to the us than the me. More committed. It doesn't say the me isn't important, but you're more committed to the us than the me.
Great. Good. So, Lord, help us to use our emotions to glorify you. And Father, help us to align our emotions with your character. I pray, Lord, that if there are particular emotions that we know that we struggle with, Father, I pray that you will enable us to have eyes and ears that are open to the changes that we need to make in order to align those emotions with you. Give us people around our lives, Lord. Give us community so that we can work these things out and we can grow together. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Good.